episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of 123 CMMC. My name is Dana Mantilia, and I am your host. And my guest today, I'm very excited to introduce the world famous Jacob Horn. Hello, Jacob. How are you?
Hi, Dana. I'm great. Thanks. I'm a big fan, so I'm happy to be here.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That means a lot. Why don't you take a minute and tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your company?
Sure. So I'm Jacob Horn, and I'm the Chief Cybersecurity Evangelist at a company called Summit 7. And we are a sort of full service firm that provides compliance and cybersecurity for companies in the defense industrial base, primarily using the Microsoft technology stack. That covers everything from compliance, security, cloud migration, operations, up through managed services, managed security services. So a full suite of whatever anybody might possibly need.
Perfect. All right. So our topic today is NFO controls. Very exciting.
It is one of the most exciting topics because it is criminally under-addressed, I think, in the larger conversation around CMMC and DFARS.
All right. So our first question is going to be, what is an NFO and why are they important?
Okay. So if you take 800-171 as a document and you go all the way to the back into Appendix E, there is a list of controls and there is a list of assumptions that were made. And so when everyone normally looks at 800-171, they see all of the controls that they're required to implement. But the question that people usually don't ask, and the part of the document that they usually don't read, are all of the things that NIST and DoD and NARA and the government assumed were in place. Mm-hmm. And so the NFO controls, NFO is the little letter marking that they use for every control that they assumed you had in place. Now, this is very important because we know that 800-171 is a sort of subset of a much bigger catalog of controls known as 853. And in order to make it more palatable for companies in the defense industrial base, they cut down all of the controls in 853 to what we have today in the 110 controls in 800-171. But that doesn't mean that all of the controls in 853 just went away. It's very important to understand that NIST and NARA and the DoD assume that you have an information security program that is up and running and risk informed and producing outputs and doing all sorts of things, because 853 and 800-171 are really just a catalog of controls for protecting information and information systems. They are not documents that teach anybody how to stand up a program. So if you don't have an existing information security program, very, very important to look at what the government assumes you have in place, because you likely have more work to do.
That is a very good point, because I think there's a lot of assumption that's going on with a lot of things so far. And with the whole self-assessing that's been going on,
that's right.
Chickens are coming home to roost when the assessors get out there in the field and start.
That's exactly right.
Looking at what's going on. So I'm glad we're talking about this, because that is a very good point of what they're already assuming that you're doing, and maybe they should not be assuming. So
that's right.
So does CMMC have NFO controls?
Okay, so a little bit of a subtle difference here. So we know that 800-171 is the standard for everybody that needs to store, process, and transmit CUI. CMMC at its most fundamental level is just a reskin of 800 and 171. Now, there are some additional requirements that are added on to 171. We've heard this a million times over the last 2 years, but they are just a one-for-one translation of 800-171 controls into CMMC. They are no different whatsoever, which means that CMMC carries forward all of the assumptions that exist in 800-171. So if you were looking at 171 and you didn't look at the assumptions, then you move on to CMMC and you didn't look at the assumptions, those assumptions don't go away. They just get moved forward and forward and forward. So it doesn't matter if CMMC goes away and something replaces it and there's another thing and there's more. It doesn't matter, because if you never go back to the very beginning and revisit those assumptions, then they will sort of they'll be a drag or an anchor on your ability to comply. So CMMC does not have explicit NFO controls in some appendix somewhere the way 800-171 does. But on a fundamental level, CMMC and 800-171 are effectively inseparable. They're the same document. So it's actually almost worse that they don't specify the assumptions, because you would have to know to go back to 171, and then know you have to go to the back of 171 to see the assumptions that are buried in it.
So 171 Appendix E.
Appendix E in 171. Okay. Just go Control F for NFO, or go all the way down to Appendix E. This is very similar. You know those Russian stacking dolls where you pull one off and there's a smaller, angrier one the deeper you go? This is sort of the Russian stacking dolls of assumptions, where you look at CMMC and you pull the top layer off, and then there's 171, and then you pull that layer off, and there's a bunch of assumptions. Then you pull that layer off, and there's more. It is not exactly what meets the eye if you were to just read the document.
Well, this is very important for anybody who's going to be going out there to help some of these contractors, making sure that the person that you're hiring knows these things, because that's something that if a C3PAO doesn't recommend this to a company, that they should know this, but let's be honest, they probably don't, or an RPO or anybody that's going to be going into the, assisting with people getting certified. That's an important thing for them to make sure they're covering. Because
absolutely. I think one way of just sort of, one tip for companies that are trying to evaluate vendors or consultants or assessors or whatever it happens to be, ask them if they're familiar with NFO controls. Even though it's not an explicit requirement, they should at least be familiar with what they imply in the conversation. And if they have no idea what you're talking about, then, be skeptical. It's not that they wouldn't be able to help you, but it is very important.
The new Department of Defense's cybersecurity program, CMMC, can be very confusing and overwhelming. A3 is a cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification. A3 builds CMMC packages and has access to a marketplace of consultants, RPOs, and assessor C3PAOs. A3 creates a roadmap for each cybersecurity requirement and helps break things down step by step. Please visit cyberdataintelligence.com/A3. That is a great idea. So everybody needs to know when they're interviewing people that are going to be helping them get ready for their assessment, they need to ask that question.
That's a good takeaway from this episode. Yep. You don't even need to know what an NFO control is. You just need to know you should ask them. And if they don't know, then maybe follow up on that question.
That's a good one. I like that. Okay, will I be assessed against NFO controls?
Okay, trick question. So will you be assessed against an NFO control? Not directly, because they are not specified requirements. The language in 171 says these are expected to be implemented without specification, I believe is the language that they use. So everyone sort of says, well, okay, there's assumptions, but I'm not getting assessed, so who cares? Problem is that if you look at what it takes to assess a control, there are inputs that are required for the outputs to provide evidence for that control. And those inputs usually come from things that were assumed to be in place. Perfect example. The least popular part of CMMC are the process maturity requirements, all of the documentation, all the policies and procedures and all these things. People hate it. They hate it. It takes too much time and it's burdensome. They don't like it. So everyone says, well, it sure would be nice if we could go back to 171 and not have to do all that documentation, because there's no explicit requirement in 171 to have those things. If you look at the structure of 853 controls, which is where 171 comes from, the very first control in every family is the policy and procedure control. They assumed that all of those were in place, which means that if you think about the questions that you're actually going to be asked on assessment day, right, you will always be asked to provide evidence of what it is that you're doing and how you're writing your policies, whether that is specified in 800-171 or not. So will you be assessed against something that is marked NFO? No, but you will be asked for the things that were assumed to already have existed. So one way or another, you're going to get assessed against them. In CMMC, it's an explicit requirement. In 171, it's an assumed requirement. So pick your poison here. At the end of the day, no matter who assesses you or what we call the program, you're going to have the things that were assumed to be in place.
And I don't know how anybody's going to put any of this stuff into practice if they're not having written documents. I mean, we all had a meeting and we all just told everybody what the policies were and everyone's going to remember it. I don't know how
it would be very difficult. It would be very difficult because, effectively you're trying to provide assurances to the assessor who is operating on behalf of the information owner, in this case, the government, that you're doing the things that you're saying you're doing. So if you just imagine a pre-assessment review before anything even gets started, what are they going to ask you? They're going to say, can you provide us with evidence of what you're doing? They're not going to show up on assessment day and be like, all right, let's test every single thing in your environment. They're going to ask for proof. If you read the assessment guides, these are evidence gathering activities. So if we read between the lines, it doesn't matter if it's explicit or assumed, you're going to have to generate the evidence. And it's, just to dwell on this for one more moment, it was assumed to exist in 171, and now it's explicit in CMMC, and people really don't like it, and they blame it sort of on CMMC. If we were to just imagine that CMMC no longer existed, we know that the requirement still exists. So for folks that think, hey, if CMMC goes away, my burden will be reduced, that's not true.
Okay, that makes sense. It does make sense. So, but even if CMMC went away and we had 800-171 and we had assessors going into the field to actually assess, that would be, something that
it's almost worse, because you have to go back and read about what they thought was there and then put the pieces together. They don't tell you what they want. They tell you what they think you had. And then you just get to discover on assessment day that that's what they wanted. At least in CMMC, they're telling you that we want it. So, like I said, not ideal, but it is very important to pay attention to.
Okay, so do gap assessments cover NFO controls?
Well, another trick question. I sure hope so. This is another tip for people watching this video. If you are doing your own self-assessment, and if you are spending money on people who are doing gap assessments for you, please ask them if they are taking into consideration what the NFO controls mean. Because if the NFO controls are assumed to be there and you have to provide things from those assumptions as inputs to your controls, then that would be a gap if you don't have it ready to go. But most people get, gap assessments or GRC tools or whatever it is that they're doing to try to gauge their readiness, and it doesn't go to that level of detail. But like I said, on assessment day, it will go to that level of detail. So, bigger picture, I think that it is important for people to think, okay, we're 2 years into this process of sort of realizing that this isn't a joke anymore. And so now we're all generally aware that 171 and DFARS and CMMC are things that exist. They're going to change a little bit, but they exist. Someone is going to come assess you against at least 800-171. So what I'd like to see the broader conversation around CMMC do is start to turn the corner. It's much more valuable to imagine and visualize what it's going to look like on assessment day, rather than sort of continue to spin our wheels and say, there's 5 levels and there's 110 controls. That's valuable, 18 months ago. But now if you sort of think, what am I going to be asked? And what does that mean as far as a gap assessment? Much more practical and actionable than just sort of your average, flip through the document and hope that my consultant gets it right.
Yeah, this is too important to throw caution to the wind like that. So
yeah.
All right. Do I need NFO controls to calculate my SPRS score?
So I don't know if you can pick up on the pattern that we've established here, but again, another trick question. If your SPRS score is being calculated against 800-171 and otherwise on assessment day, you would be asked for things that were assumed to be there, then I hope you're calculating your SPRS score, or the person you're paying to calculate your SPRS score for you is taking these things into consideration. Because if you have not, or if they have not, there is a very good chance that your SPRS score was calculated incorrectly. And there's probably a good chance that you're using your SPRS score to sort of reassure yourself about your overall readiness for CMMC. So if you calculated it incorrectly, if you didn't check your own assumptions about how you calculated the score, then you may be in for a surprise on assessment day, which nobody wants to have happen.
No surprises on assessment day. So that's something
we don't want any surprises. We want it to be a formality. So do your due diligence and read the appendix.
Yes. Okay. Well, this was excellent. Very, very helpful information that people may not have thought of. So I hope a lot of people see this video and it helps them better prepare for their CMMC assessment. So thank you very, very much, Jacob, for your time and all your amazing information. Appreciate that.
This was so much fun, Dana. This was great. I hope we can do it again soon.
Absolutely. And thank you to everybody who's been listening out there. And hopefully you are learning along the way of what you need to do for your CMMC journey to be nice and smooth. So take care. We hope to see you again soon. This episode is brought to you by A3, a CMMC cloud-based collaborative environment for an organization seeking certification, otherwise known as an OSC, to build CMMC packages and share with a marketplace of consultant RPOs and assessor C3PAOs.